Vasquez, founder of New Stitch a Day and headmaster here at Knitiversity, and we are here for our second sweater knitting class. We're getting prepared for our sweater knitting boot camp, which will be coming up next month. And I am really excited to share with you today our topic, which is about the perfect sweater yarn. Now, before we jump into that, you want to head over to knitiversity.com/SPG, and there you're going to find our sweater planning guide. It's a free download. It's like, I want to say 30 something pages of really useful content that's going to help you walk through all the questions that you want to answer before you start knitting your sweater. In fact, we cover some of the stuff I'm talking about today in even more detail in there. So head over to knitiversity.com/SPG. Also, if you're watching us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, press that notification bell, and if you enjoy today's class, click that like button. It really helps spread the word about Knitiversity and the information that we are putting out into the world. And if you're on Facebook, please follow us on Facebook and click like for this this class. All right, so today we are talking about the best yarn for sweaters. And this is a pretty big topic. This is not going to be a Yarn 101 class. We are going to really kind of just scratch the surface of this topic, but I think I'm going to give you a lot of great stuff to think about, and you will be able to have a good idea of what yarn will be best for your next sweater, or what kind of yarn at least. One other quick business item. If you have a question during the video, I'm going to have a section at the end for questions. So just hold tight. I'm not actually watching the chat. So if you're there saying hi, hello, nice to see you. But I will not be taking your questions until the very end. So stick around there. We will get started doing the questions at about the 45-minute mark or so. And with that, let's get going. Okay. So when we're dealing with knitting sweaters, there's a lot of questions that are going to come to mind, like what yarn weight is the best, which yarn fiber type is right for me, and how much yarn should I buy? And we're going to cover all of these topics in today's class. So let's jump into the first question. What is the best sweater yarn? And there are, in order to figure that out, you're going to need to answer a bunch of other questions, like what is the weather like where you're going to be wearing the sweater? Are you sensitive to different kinds of, like, are you sensitive to animal fibers or to wool? Do you need it to be washable? How much does the yarn cost, and what's your budget? And does it come in colors that you actually like or want to knit with or want to make a sweater with that you're going to wear? And the truth is that even if you were to answer all of these questions, there isn't a best sweater yarn for everyone. There is basically, I mean, there are dozens of brands, like, I mean, really just tons and tons of brands. And I'm not going to be really recommending any specific brand here. I have my own favorites that I like to knit with all the time. And, You probably have yarns that you love and want to support as well. But this class is not going to be about recommending a specific yarn or saying that like this one yarn is the best. Although at the very end of the class, I am going to give one recommendation for a type of yarn that I think is better than most and will really work for a lot of people. But you're going to need to stick around till the end to hear that recommendation. But I'm not going to, the goal of this is not to recommend a specific brand. The reality is the best yarn is the best yarn that is for you, okay? Because everybody's circumstances are different. So what we're going to talk about in this class is how do you figure out what the best yarn for you is when you're knitting your next sweater project. And sweaters do have a little bit different considerations than some other types of projects that you might have. So the first question that we want to answer in order to figure out what is the best yarn for you is what yarn weight do you want? And if you're not familiar with yarn weight, I'm going to give you a quick overview of yarn weight and why that's important, because this is a really important question to figure out when it comes to picking the yarn that's best for your next sweater. So this is a great graphic that I pulled from Lion Brand. So all credit goes to them for putting this together. But the Craft Yarn Council has put together what they call the industry standard for yarn weights. And you'll see on a lot of ball bands, especially in big box craft stores, these numbers, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Technically there's 8, there's also a 0, but that's considered a lace weight yarn. And not a lot of people hand knit with that. It's really, really tiny. It's more for like doilies and tatting and crochet. It's not that popular for hand knitting. You might see it used in machine knitting. And truthfully, you'll probably, like your t-shirts and stuff are made from what's essentially a lace weight yarn that's been knit on a machine, an industrial machine. But it's not a great hand knitting yarn. So we're not going to cover that. We're going to talk about these 7 weights here. So let's dive right in. Okay, first up we have our number 1, which is super fine. Now this is a really thin, tiny yarn, and yarn weight basically is determined by the diameter of the yarn strand. Okay, it's how thick is the yarn or how far around the circumference is it. It's not a perfect science because there's a lot of things that go into determining how thick a yarn is. And we're not going to talk about ply today, but plying is when you take multiple strands of yarn and you twist them together, as you can see with this these bigger strands over on the right here. The more plies, the more sturdy the yarn. That's also going to add some thickness to it. But you can also get a looser twist that will provide more loft in the yarn and make it technically thicker. And so it's a little like an imprecise science. It used to all be based on plies. That's not the case anymore. So we have, and yarn weight really comes from, it used to be that you would buy yarn by the ounce or by the gram. You would go to your little store, your general store, and they would have big spools of yarn. And so you would say, okay, I want this much weight of yarn. And or at least that's my understanding of it. But the Craft Yarn Council has now created these standards, and superfine is very thin yarn. It's really great for hand knit lace projects. As it says here, it's often used for socks, although you'll also find socks knit with the next one, which is fine weight, which is our number 2. And this is a lightweight yarn. You're going to see this used really often in sometimes it's called baby weight yarn. It's used for baby projects, baby outfits. And that extra thinness there just makes it good for those really lightweight projects. Then we have light, which is our number 3. Sometimes you'll see this as like a DK weight yarn or double knitting yarn. Again, you'll see more lightweight projects like hats are really good with this weight yarn. When it says it's a double knitting yarn, sometimes it will be added together to give you a thicker fabric when you are doing double knitting. And that double knitting, when you add the 2 strands together, makes it more like a medium or Aran weight yarn. Next, we have medium, which is probably what you have most of in your stash. It's the number 4. It's the yarn that I first started working with when I began knitting. And it really is sort of the workhorse yarn. The majority of patterns that you find are going to be using a 4 in the medium weight. Next, we have bulky. This is going to be a bit thicker. It's going to be that chunky, big yarn that you see. Sometimes you'll see accessories and such done with these. You'll see this all over Pinterest. It's really those big, thick hats and bulky sweaters. And it's a nice yarn to work with, and we'll talk about some of the pros and cons about this later. Then we have super bulky. This is going to be like a really thick yarn. You're going to see this more often used with accessories around the home, really big scarves, really thick hats. You're probably not going to see a lot of sweaters knit out of these, but it's really good for blankets, and sometimes you'll see it used for hand knitting, or you'll have a few strands put together for hand knitting. And really, number 7 is what you'll see used for hand knitting these days. You'll see like those big knitted poofs and other like really thick, chunky blankets. This was a new yarn weight that was added in the last couple of years because hand knitting became so popular, and you started to see these very thick yarns starting to be produced. But it's not very common to make garments with a yarn this big. And once you get into these bulky and super bulky and jumbo yarns, they vary quite a bit in the diameter. So you might have something that's at the like smaller end of these things that is better to use for more generic projects, whereas on the thicker end, it's going to be not very nice to wear in any type of garment, I would say. So, and you should keep that in mind, that these are very much guidelines when it comes to the different types of the weights of yarns. Each one of these has a difference in gauge of about 6 stitches or so, 4 to 6 stitches. And in most projects, that's going to be the difference between a half an inch to like a full inch, maybe even more in some of these bulky or super bulky yarns. So just keep in mind that just because it has these numbers on it doesn't mean that it's going to be a direct substitution. And we're also going to not talk about yarn substitution today. This is more about finding the right yarn for you. And then, well, we can talk about substitution maybe another time. Okay, so what of these yarns are the best for knitting sweaters? Now, this makes some recommendations already for what is good for sweaters, but I have my own opinion. So the jumbo yarn is definitely out. It's way too big. It's way too thick. You would never want to wear anything with this. You might find like a high-end fashion thing that's made out of yarn, but the average knitter is not going to make anything practical out of a jumbo yarn. Also, with the super fine and the fine yarns, you might make something with a fine yarn. It's just that it's so thin that it's going to take a long time to knit with it. So I would say for most people, a super fine or a fine yarn isn't really recommended. And while you could definitely knit a sweater out of a super bulky yarn. In fact, I've knit a couple of sweaters out of super bulky yarn. They're so hot, at least for me, that every single time that I've made one, it just isn't that comfortable to wear. So I would say for most people, super bulky yarn is also out. So we're going to focus on these three here in the middle when it comes to picking the yarn that you're going to knit your next sweater with. And we're going to talk about some of the different properties that you want to take into consideration when it comes to choosing these yarns. So we've got our three: light, medium, and bulky. And we're going to take a look at three different properties: the drape, the speed at which you can knit with it, and how warm is the yarn. So the drape for the lightweight yarns, the DK weight, the sport weights around there, it's going to be great. That thinness of the yarn really allows the stitches to shift and move and gives the fabric a nice flow. The trade-off here is that, oops, sorry. The trade-off is that the speed at which you can knit is much slower, and that's because in order to make the same number, in order to cover the same amount of area, you have to knit quite a bit more stitches. So it's going to take more time to knit a sweater using a lightweight yarn, but they're going to be cooler. Regardless of the fiber type that you use in the yarn, it's going to feel a little bit cooler just because the yarn isn't that thick. The fabric's not going to be that thick. It's going to be a bit more comfortable to wear in a wider range of climates. Now with the medium yarn, the drape is good. Like, it's going to be decent. Some of that's going to depend upon how loose you knit the yarn. If you use a little bit bigger needle than is recommended, you can get better drape. If you use a smaller needle, it's going to be tighter. It's going to be a little bit stiffer. It's going to be a little bit more sturdy. You're going to have an average speed working with the yarn, because this yarn is basically right in the middle. You know, it's going to take, this is what we base a lot of our time around when we're estimating how long it would take to knit a sweater. When we say it takes between 30 and 45 hours to knit a sweater, it's based off of working with a medium weight yarn. And it's going to be on the warmer side. Again, this is going to be heavily affected by the fiber content, but because it's you know, a semi-thick yarn, it is going to have a nice amount of warmth to the finished fabric. And that, again, is also affected on the stitch pattern that you're using, the size of needle that you're using, how much air is able to pass through the fabric is going to affect the warmth as well. Okay, finally, we have our bulky. The drape on the bulky is, it's not that great. The problem is, in order to get good drape, you have to use a little bit bigger yarn. The bigger yarn doesn't hold, the bigger needle doesn't hold its shape as well when you're knitting at that tension. So you can get an okay drape out of a bulky yarn or chunky yarn, but the end result is probably not going to be quite as nice as what you would get from a medium or a lightweight yarn. But it's much faster to knit with a bigger yarn. Bigger stitches, fewer stitches needed to knit. And finally, it's going to be pretty hot. The thickness of the yarn combined with the density that you need to knit at in order to maintain the structure of the fabric means that this is going to be a hot sweater no matter what, basically. And then if you pair that with a warmer fiber, and you've got, basically you need to live somewhere that's quite cold in order for it to be a comfortable sweater for you to wear. It doesn't mean that you can't make a good outerwear type sweater using a bulky yarn. In fact, I would definitely recommend it. It's just going to be better where the climate is cooler or cold a lot of the time. Okay, so that is the main things that we want to take into consideration when we're discussing yarn weight. Obviously, the medium weight yarn, the number 4, is going to be sort of the go-to yarn. My personal preference is to go with the lighter weight yarn, even though it takes a little bit longer to knit a sweater with that. It's still going to be, it's not that much more time, and the benefit that you get from the nicer drape and the more versatile fabric from the sweater, that's what makes that lightweight number 3 my personal preference. But no matter what your circumstances, one of these 3 yarn weights is probably going to work for most people. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about is the fiber types. But before we do that, I want to remind you guys that we are doing a huge giveaway right now. We've got a brand new magazine that's coming out in January of next year called Yarnist Magazine. It's going to be a monthly magazine focused on simple, classic patterns. We have a lot of great multimedia features that we are incorporating into the magazine. So not only is it going to be digital and have links to video tutorials, podcasts, and additional resources, but it's also going to be print. So it's the only monthly print knitting magazine that I know of right now. And as really the print magazines have been dying off left and right over the past few years, we wanted to introduce something back into the world for all those people that love to feel something in their hands, because we're knitters. We like to use our hands, right? So here's what we're doing. We're giving away a lifetime digital subscription to Yarnist Magazine. So you will get every single issue from now until we are, we die or you die. And hopefully both of those things don't happen for a very long time. But you will get every single driftwood needles, and they come, I think that it comes with 9 sizes, and a bunch of cables so that you really have everything that you need in order to knit any project that comes your way. And you're also going to get a lifetime membership to Knitiversity Plus, which is where we host all of our classes. So we have over 40 classes on there. We just uploaded a class last month called Knitting Without Fear. And you're going to get unlimited access for life. Every single class that we put out on Knitiversity Plus, you'll get included with your membership. So in order to enter, you go to knitiversity.com/win. And we're going to be giving this away every month. Okay, the winners will be announced on the last day of the month, and then you can enter again the next month to win again. So there's plenty of opportunities to win. It's open to everybody worldwide as long as it's legal in your country. It's a fantastic prize. We're really excited about Yarnist Magazine, and I hope that you enter to win, and I wish you good luck for that. Okay, so let's jump back into the class. So the next thing that we want to talk about is the fiber type, and there are 3 primary categories of yarn fibers. We have animal fibers, plant fibers, and man-made fibers. And we'll go into the animal fibers last, but I'll talk real quickly about these other 2. So when we're talking about man-made fibers, we're talking about things like acrylic, which is probably the most popular. Nylon is one that you'll see a lot of, and that's used a lot in socks, or it gives some extra strength and some stretchiness to the fabric. You'll see rayon is another man-made fiber. It's kind of like silky. There is tencel, and like I can't think of all the other man-made fibers. There's not nearly as many man-made fibers as there are other ones, but the most prominent ones are acrylic and nylon. Next, we have our plant fibers. The plant fibers are things like cotton, bamboo. Although bamboo sometimes is a man-made fiber, the way that it's processed in order to get there. Soy, you'll see turned into fiber. Linen is another big one. Hemp, and then there's seaweed, I've seen, is another plant fiber. And a lot of these go through, except for cotton, they go through sort of a chemical process that makes them pliable so that they can be spun into yarn. With things like soy, and even sometimes with the bamboo, it doesn't have a way to hold on to itself. So the fibers are very smooth, and so they don't ply very well into yarn. And so you'll see them turn into like tape yarns or ribbon yarns, where they actually are knitting them into like a tube and then turning that into yarn. It gives it a very interesting look, but it's not so common that you're going to see some of those things actually spun into like a twisted yarn like you are used to seeing with more of your animal fibers. We'll talk more about those two, or the most popular of those two, in a little bit. But finally, we have our animal fibers. So for animal fibers, that includes all kinds of things. We have, and it comes from all kinds of animals: sheep, rabbits, llama, goats give us cashmere and mohair. There are two different kinds of goats. Buffalo, camel. I don't know if I mentioned alpaca already. There's a few others like muskox. There's paca which is a form of an alpaca. And probably a few other animal fibers that yak is another one that you'll see. So anything that's got sort of like a long undercoat can be, the fiber can be taken from it and usually spun. Some things like dog and cat, like their hair is not long enough really or it's too smooth to actually catch and spin into something. But these are the most popular animal fibers that you'll see out there. And some of these aren't popular. Some of them are kind of rare. Things like buffalo and camel are not that common, and they tend to be a little bit more expensive. But for the most part, a lot of these, unless you're talking about cashmere and Angora, which comes from a very specific kind of rabbit, these aren't like the best fibers for sweaters, or for some reason they may be just are very expensive. So for the common person, we're going to focus primarily on wool. So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of wool. Wool has three really great things. Regulating temperature. So this is why sheep don't die when they are out with the big furry wool fleeces around them. It's because the wool actually traps the air near the body and creates sort of this air buffer. And so it helps keep the hot air out and the cool air in. And vice versa. If it's cold, it'll help keep the warm air in and the hot air and the cold air out. And the same thing happens for humans when you wear wool on your body. That's why a lot of sweaters are made from wool, because it's a great insulator. In fact, you'll even see wool used as insulation in homes for this same reason. So it's an amazing fiber for regulating temperature, and that's basically why it's the king of sweater yarns. It's generally soft, and that has a lot to do with the length of the fiber staple. You probably have heard about the wonders of merino wool, and the thing that makes merino wool so nice is that it has a very tight crimp, which means that the fiber is very long, and that crimpness, that high crimp in the fiber makes it soft. So so that's why merino's wool is super soft. There are actually 4 categories of wool, although 2 of those categories are not really suitable for hand knitting. Unfortunately, I don't know the categories off the top of my head. But that second tier of category, it's a little bit on the rougher side. And it's not that those sweaters can't be nice. It's just that they don't feel quite as nice against the skin. So they make better for like an outer coat or a sweater that's worn over something else. Now, one thing about softness does not mean durable, okay? So a lot of times there's a very soft yarn, but that soft yarn could be soft also because it's spun very loosely, which means it might pill a lot. So you just want to make sure that the yarn has a good structure to it, that it has a lot of plies, and it's still soft. But softness I would take a yarn that's a little bit less soft and more durable that's going to last longer, because if the yarn is too soft, you're just going to wear through it in a couple of years. In fact, this sweater that I'm wearing right now, I actually have worn through the elbows multiple times. I'm actually probably going to knit a new version of this. I bought this at the store, but I'm probably going to make one by hand because I like this sweater so much. And this is 100% lamb's wool, but even at that, like I would say, it's not super soft. It's comfortable, but it's not crazy soft. However, wool is in general softer than other types of yarn, particularly like man-made yarns and plant fibers. So again, this is why it's one of the more popular options for knitting a sweater. And finally, it's very resilient. And by resilient, I mean that it keeps its shape well. So it's not as susceptible to shrinkage or stretching. The fiber is going to keep its shape very well. And so that's what makes it nice to block the fabric. You can sort of like put some warm water and let it dry and reshape the fabric. And you can do that multiple times and it's going to maintain its shape pretty well. And that's a huge feature of wool that's you don't find with some other fabrics. Probably the only other one that's really close to that is like yak fiber. It's another really good wool, but it's a little bit more on the rare side. Now, wool does have some cons. It can be expensive. You get what you pay for. You can buy cheaper wool from South America or other parts of America. You're going to be paying for that crimp in the fiber, which is going to be that softness. It's going to be that strength, durability, and resiliency. Good wool costs money. Wool can also felt because those fibers are not quite as smooth when they're agitated, particularly when they're agitated with water. It's going to, sort of combine together and make a thick piece of fabric. Now, it takes a lot of agitation in order to do that, but it is something that can happen that doesn't happen with some other fibers. And it is for some people an allergen. So I will also make a note on this. What some people experience as an allergy is just a reaction to an irritant. So it's not so much that they're having an allergic reaction, it's more that they're irritated by either the roughness of the wool because it's a low quality, or it still has some lanolin in it, and that for some people is they have a reaction to the lanolin, which is the natural oil that's in the fleece of the sheep. So if you think that you have a wool allergy and you haven't tested this before, try using a very good quality merino wool and see what happens. You may be perfectly fine with the higher quality product. Okay, so let's move on to cotton. And we're gonna rush through these here so that we can get to our questions. But cotton is the most prominent man-made fiber. Pima cotton is considered to be sort of the gold standard, although Egyptian cotton is also considered to be very good. It's very breathable. This is why all of your t-shirts are made of cotton. This is why your underwear and your socks are primarily made of cotton. Although underwear a lot of times now is made of like a synthetic yarn. It is very absorbent. This is why again, it's often used as undershirts because it's going to pull that sweat away from the body and help keep you dry and help keep you cool. That wet fabric, the fibers getting wet wick the moisture away from the body. Now, wool is actually pretty good at this as well, but it's not as absorbent as cotton. Cotton is very absorbent. This is why your towels are made of cotton. And it's very durable. It takes a lot of work in order to make cotton pill or to wear down. Like, it is a strong fiber. And finally, it is pretty affordable. Even for good quality cotton, it's not that expensive. It is, it's a good workhorse yarn, and you'll probably notice that a lot of sweaters that you find, particularly in the summer, and sweaters that you'll find at the department stores are made of cotton. And the reason why is that it's pretty affordable, and also people don't really pay attention to the fiber that's in their sweaters. So I have a cotton blend sweater, and I wear it all the time. It's a cardigan, and the nice thing is that you can still wear a sweater in the summertime on those cool nights without getting too hot. But it does have some cons. It's not very elastic, which means that it doesn't stretch in the sense that, not that it doesn't stretch, but it doesn't come back when it stretches. So unlike wool, which you can stretch and it keeps its shape, cotton doesn't. It stretches and it doesn't really come back. And it also, when it does come back due to like high heat, it shrinks down. So usually when you've seen like a shirt or a sweater that's shrunk, it's because the cotton has shrunk. It's heavy. It is a pretty heavy fabric. And that's because it's a little bit more on the dense side, but also there's that weight to it. And so because it's heavy, there's the weight when it gets wet. And because it's heavy and it's inelastic, it will tend to lose its shape over time. So you might knit a sweater that fits when you're done with it, but over time it's going to get longer, it's going to get bigger, unless you wash it in warm water, and then it's going to get a lot smaller. So it's not a bad option for sweater, but you do want to keep in mind what it's good for and what it's not. Finally, we have acrylic, which is the most popular man-made yarn. It's very affordable. It's super lightweight, which means it's relatively comfortable to wear. But because it's essentially plastic, it doesn't breathe that good. I'm jumping into the cons. It's pretty durable, which means that it's going to last a long time, but it does have a tendency to pill. Well, it looks like I have affordable on there twice because it's very affordable. It's like probably the most affordable yarn that you will find. My very first yarn that I ever bought was Simply Soft from Karen. That's 100% acrylic yarn. You get a ton of yardage for not very much money. Now even Red Heart has got some like really nice acrylic yarns. It can be pretty soft when it's made properly. I don't know from personal experience, but I'm told that in South America, acrylic yarn is the luxury yarn because the best quality yarns are primarily made with the acrylic yarn. So there are some really good acrylic yarns that are being made these days, but they do have some drawbacks. They hold moisture. They don't breathe very well, so they can get kind of like claustrophobic. I made a hat out of acrylic a long time ago, and I couldn't even wear it because I just would sweat so much inside. And then it does have a tendency to pill, and that's because those fibers are just not very long. And so anytime you get wear and tear on it, it pills a lot. Now, any yarn has a tendency to pill over time, and that's really a matter of maintenance and how do you care for the fabric, but it does have a tendency to pill more than others. So those are the three primary fiber types that you're going to find. Acrylic, you're going to see blended a lot with other things. So you'll see acrylic and wool, or maybe like alpaca wool and acrylic. Sometimes they'll put a tiny bit of cashmere in there to up the softness, and that's how they keep the price down, basically by putting a lot of acrylic in there. So those are good options if you're looking for an affordable type of yarn that has sort of the best of both worlds. Is something that's got like an acrylic wool blend, and some of those luxury fibers tossed in there to up the softness factor. Now, when it comes to how much yarn you should buy, we don't have time for that right now, but we go into detail about this in the sweater planning guide. So don't forget to go over to knitiversity.com/sweater planning guide, SPG, to download that. There's a whole section that's specifically about how much yarn you need for different size sweaters and different yarn weights. And I don't think that we give price ranges in there, but because that depends heavily on the type of fiber that's in the fabric, that's in the yarn, to determine its price. But there is a detailed guide in there. Go to knitiversity.com/SPG to download that. Okay, so I did promise that I would recommend a yarn for you. And this is, in my opinion, probably the best compromise when it comes to a sweater yarn, and that is a cotton wool blend. And there are three companies that have such a blend. There's probably a couple more, but these are the ones that I find are my favorites. Sweater by Spud & Chloe, which is a Blue Sky Fibers company. It's a little bit more geared to children or kids' clothes, but they have a pretty wide range of colors now. It's relatively affordable, a good amount of yardage. And the distinction with this yarn is that it is super wash wool. So it is completely washable in the machine, which makes it really nice. I've knit a few items with this. I really love this yarn. It's a great sweater yarn. And it's 50-50 wool and cotton. Then there's Balance by O-Wool. Now this is a worsted, a woolen spun yarn, so it's spun a little bit differently. It's not quite as smooth as the Sweater by Spud & Chloe, but the great thing about this yarn is that it is their organic cotton and sustainably sourced merino wool. So there's no worry about it coming from, I know in some parts of Australia, there's some abusive practices around the raising of merino sheep. I don't know how widespread that is, but I know that the wool used in O-Wool's yarn is very green, very organic, very environmentally conscious, and sustainably sourced. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't throw in our own yarn here. This is Zephyr by Argyle Sheep. We're not currently producing the yarn, but we still do have some yarn. It is basically the same yarn as Balance by O-Wool, except that it's 100% American made, and the fiber quality that is used in it is a little bit higher than those sourced by O-Wool. So very similar yarns, but American made, a little bit nicer quality, and the fiber blend is a tiny bit different. It's 55% wool from Texas and 45% cotton from California. And then it's milled in Wisconsin, dyed in Maine, and sold out of Southern California. So These are 3 great sweater options that use that wool cotton blend. You get sort of the best of both worlds there. Okay, so it's time for questions and answers. So if you've been holding on to your questions, now is the time, and I will do my best to answer those questions, and we'll do this for the next 10 minutes or so, or really till we run out. So I will just go through these as I see them, and I'll move back up a little bit as well, but now's the time to type in your questions. Margaret asks, what is viscose? So viscose is a man-made fiber, but it's usually made from bamboo. So technically, while it is a man-made fiber, it's made from a plant. So it goes through a chemical process. It's then turned into like a mush that's extruded into these like silk strands, essentially, and that's how you get viscose. It's pretty elastic. It's pretty strong. It's like you're not going to see like a yarn that's made just from viscose. And when it's bamboo, it's not viscose, but viscose is made from bamboo, if that makes sense. The last yarn is Zephyr. Let's see. Joyce asks, can cotton be knitted with a thin elastic to keep its shape? Probably not. Like, if you're going to do that, then I would look for a cotton blend yarn that's already got that fiber in it. I think to just knit it along with it isn't going to be enough added strength to the yarn. That's just my opinion. But that's where what I would say. Joyce asks, how much should we spend on yarn for a decent sweater? That depends on a lot of factors. So you can absolutely knit a sweater for about 50 bucks, maybe even less. If you're knitting with like a pound of love, a yarn like that on sale, you know, you might be $20 or $30 in to get enough yarn. But I would say, you know, a mid-range ball of yarn is going to be around $8. That's for like an okay acrylic wool blend, something like Woolies. And then that's going to have about 200 yards in it. For the average woman, you need about 1,000 yards. So you're going to need 5 skeins of that. So you're still under 50 when it comes to a yarn like that. You can spend, you know, if you're knitting with a luxury yarn, a cashmere sweater, you know, that can be $20 a skein, $25 a skein, and you're gonna get, you know, you're looking at $150, $200 for enough yarn at that point, maybe a little bit more than that. My brother knit a sweater out of the buffalo yarn. I think that was a $600 sweater by the time it was done. Luckily, they donated the yarn for that. But for the average sweater, I think you're looking around like 80 bucks is going to be like a good, like mid-level quality sweater. So 80 to like 120 is probably where I would be like, okay, yeah, we're doing good. You don't have to spend that much. If you can spend less, spend less. Margaret asks, are these videos available to watch again? Yes, absolutely. They're recorded. They're up on YouTube. I'm going to be making some blog posts as well for the website where we break down these things in detail, and so you can read through it, but we'll also have the video up there too. Isi, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. What is bamboo? I have one that's half bamboo and cotton. Bamboo is a plant fiber. Velvety says it's panda food. Yeah, it's also panda food. Technically, it's a grass, and they use a chemical process to strip it down and turn it into a fiber that can be made into yarn. And they make all kinds of stuff out of it. You can get bamboo T-shirts, bamboo socks, bamboo underwear. It's a good fabric, but yeah, it's gonna. It has some different properties than cotton. It's less stretchy than cotton even, but it's better at wicking away moisture. I think it has some antimicrobial elements to it as well. Let's see. Are there any wool style plant yarns? They seem so super smooth and silky. This is from Francis. So let's see. Are there any woolly style plant yarns? They all seem so super smooth and silky. Not really. I would say Lion Brand used to have this organic cotton that was spun in an interesting way where it was a really lightly loose single ply, but then it was plied with a thinner thread to give it some extra strength. But it made it nice and soft to knit with. And I don't know if they still make it, but it was a wonderful yarn to work with. So, and it probably felt the closest to like a wool yarn. As far as like just straight up plant fibers, the problem with plant fibers is that they are rougher than the animal fibers. And so they tend to stick on the needles more. That's why when you're knitting with the plant fiber yarn, it's probably better to knit with metal needles because the needles are smoother, whereas wood needles are going to catch on the yarn more. So if you're looking at plant fibers because you're allergic to animal fibers, then you're going to have a hard time finding something that's great. Or you could find something that's possibly you could find like an alpaca cotton blend, because alpaca is basically hypoallergenic, so people aren't allergic to it, and it's super soft, so you're not going to be irritated by it either. So most people don't have an issue with alpaca. The problem with alpaca is that it also stretches; it doesn't keep its shape. So because the fibers are completely smooth, so they don't catch on each other. They're not completely smooth, but they don't catch on each other as much. Donna is asking, the Zephyr yarn is not readily available. You can buy it at Argyle Sheep. There's just low quantity, so we haven't put in a new order to re-up on it. We might if there's a big enough demand. The problem really is just like I haven't had time to run a yarn company in addition to what we're doing here, so that's why I haven't put as much effort into continuing the yarn lines, but we are looking at other options to keep it going in other ways. And we do have a lot of it that's not dyed yet. So there is the potential for it to make a reappearance in the future. Shamsa said, what's the difference between knitting and crochet? Knitting uses 2 needles, and it is the process of making fabric through interlocking loops. And so you will put loops onto the needles, and then you pull loops through each of the previous row's loops. And it's kind of like chainmail. So over the course of time, you build the fabric row by row, and it ends up with this really nice flow and drape to it. The knitted fabric that you're used to seeing is your t-shirts, your socks, underwear. Those are pretty much all using knit fabric. Sweaters as well. When you're talking about crochet, crochet uses a hook, and it is also the process of creating fabric, but you're creating individual locking loops. So you'll pull the loop through, and that stitch is now locked in place. The difference between crochet is that each loop is wrapped around the row before versus just being pulled through the row before, which makes it a thicker fabric. It's less pliable, and it makes it less versatile when it comes to garments. So you can make a crocheted sweater, but it's never going to have the same kind of drape as a knitted sweater. So I find crochet better for things like blankets, toys, and probably like shawls. Although lace knitting shawls are beautiful as well. It's just that you can do lace much faster in crochet than you can in knitting. And Velvety recommends that you don't plant bamboo in your yard because it grows super fast and it'll take over everything. So, all right, guys, that is it for the questions. So I want to thank you all for coming today. I hope that you learned a lot and that you found this useful, and that you have a better idea of how to proceed choosing the right yarn for your next sweater project. If you enjoyed this class, please click the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like our page on Facebook, and also hit the notification bell on YouTube so you get reminded of new videos that go up. We got a lot of new content coming very soon, and this is all in preparation for our sweater knitting boot camp next month. So we hope that you are ready and raring to go by the time that we get started. Check out that sweater planning guide over at knitiversity.com/SPG and get that downloaded. And remember, you can also enter to win that Knit for Life package at knitiversity.com/win. Okay. That's it. Have a great day. And remember,